This morning, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz again. 24 hours ago, the message coming out of Washington was triumph. A single word posted in capital letters, "Thank you." The signal was unmistakable: de-escalation, resolution, control. Markets reacted instantly, oil dropped, equities surged, television panels aligned in perfect consensus. Deal close. War ending. America wins. And then, within a single news cycle, the entire narrative collapsed under the weight of reality. Because Iran did not describe what was happening as diplomacy, or deterrence, or even conflict management, Iran used a different word, a word that reframes the entire situation. Piracy. Maritime robbery. That was the language. That was the framing. And in the same breath, ships began turning around in open water. A tanker went dark, fully disappeared from tracking systems. 5 vessels, Greek and Indian flagged, approached the strait and reversed course before entry. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced publicly that its forces were in full readiness and its finger was on the trigger. So what changed? What actually happened between the moment of celebration and the moment of reversal? Why did the deal evaporate almost as soon as it was declared? And more importantly, why did almost nobody in mainstream coverage anticipate this outcome? Because the question being asked was wrong from the start. Every anchor, every analyst, every breaking news segment framed the situation the same way. Will Iran accept the deal before the ceasefire expires? That question assumes the outcome is Iran's decision alone. It assumes that pressure accumulates linearly. That pain, applied long enough, becomes submission. That eventually, inevitably, Iran picks up the phone and agrees. But that is not how this system works. The correct question is not about Iran's willingness to accept terms. The correct question is structural. How does a country under sustained bombardment, 50 consecutive days, whose supreme leader was eliminated at the opening strike, whose central bank projects over a decade of recovery, whose currency lost 15% in a single month, how does that country still close the most critical oil corridor on Earth and speak with the authority to reject the terms of the world's most powerful military? What is supporting that position? Because it is not simply missiles. Missile activity declined in the final phase of the conflict. American strikes were effective. Infrastructure damage is real. Economic pressure is severe. Sanctions, blockade, and kinetic operations all applied simultaneously. By traditional models, that combination produces capitulation. But here, it does not. And the reason it does not is because the foundation underneath Iran is not purely Iranian. It is structural. It was built over time, quietly, methodically, and almost entirely outside the frame of public attention. The answer is China. Not China as rhetoric, not China as headline, China as system, as architecture, as a decade-long construction project designed specifically for a moment like this. A moment where pressure would be applied and resistance would need to hold, not indefinitely, but long enough to preserve choice. This structure begins in 2018, the year the United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement and reinstated maximum pressure sanctions. In Washington, it was framed as leverage. In Tehran, it triggered adaptation. And in Beijing, it triggered calculation. Because 1/3 of China's oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz. 1/3 of the energy powering its industrial base flows through a corridor historically influenced, if not controlled, by American naval power. That is not a vulnerability you ignore. That is a vulnerability you redesign. China made a decision. If the United States ever weaponized that corridor fully, if it demonstrated the ability to constrict or control global energy flow, then China's economic stability would be contingent on American tolerance. That was unacceptable. So China built redundancy, quietly, layer by layer. The first layer, financial independence. American sanctions rely on control of the global dollar system, specifically the SWIFT network. Remove a country from SWIFT, and its ability to transact internationally collapses. China's response was simple in concept and complex in execution. Bypass the system entirely. Iranian oil purchases began to be settled in yuan. Direct transfers between Chinese and Iranian banks, outside the dollar network, outside SWIFT, outside American visibility. No interception, no freezing of assets, no leverage. Revenue continued to flow, not at peak levels, but at sufficient volume to sustain state function, to prevent economic suffocation, to keep the system alive. The second layer, logistics invisibility, the so-called shadow fleet, a network of tankers operating beyond conventional tracking mechanisms, ships disabling transponders, transfers conducted in open water, oil relabeled, rerouted, reassigned. Iranian crude becomes Malaysian on paper, delivered to independent refineries structured specifically to process sanctioned supply. Official records show zero Iranian imports. Meanwhile, reported Malaysian exports to China exceed Malaysia's total production capacity by hundreds of thousands of barrels per day. The discrepancy is not theoretical. It is arithmetic. It is physical. It is continuous. This is not a workaround. This is a parallel system operating at scale. The third layer, strategic insulation. Over the 2 years preceding the conflict, China accumulated massive reserves of discounted oil from sanctioned producers. Iran and Russia both selling below market due to restricted buyer access. China purchased and stored. By the time the first strike occurred, those reserves reached approximately 1.2 billion barrels. That number is not abstract. It translates into months of uninterrupted supply. When the strait closed and global prices surged, China did not feel the shock. Its refineries continued operating. Its economy continued moving. The pressure designed to cascade through the system and amplify pain did not reach its primary target. And in insulating itself, China indirectly insulated Iran's most critical customer. The fourth layer, surveillance dominance, satellite capability, high-resolution orbital imaging integrated into Iranian targeting systems, real-time observation of regional military infrastructure, American positions monitored continuously from space, data feeding into operational decision-making, and critically, no viable option for neutralization without escalating into direct confrontation with China. This is not theoretical alignment. This is functional integration. And taken together, these four layers create a condition where pressure exists, but collapse does not. That distinction is everything, because pressure without collapse preserves agency. Iran is under strain, severe strain, but it retains decision-making capacity. It can choose when to escalate, when to pause, when to negotiate, when to walk away. That margin, small but sufficient, is the product of the system China built. Now, to be clear, the American strategy is not baseless. There is precedent. Sanctions have forced change before. Libya, South Africa. Economic pressure, sustained over time, has produced structural concessions. And the indicators in this case are real. Currency depreciation, reduced missile output, maritime interdictions, expanding enforcement zones, negotiations that showed measurable progress, numbers that moved, positions that shifted. This is not fiction. But the critical error is conflating pain with inevitability. Pain does not guarantee collapse. Collapse requires isolation, total isolation, and that condition does not exist here because the architecture prevents it. So when the ceasefire window opened, both sides entered negotiations with fundamentally different assumptions. Washington assumed cumulative pressure was approaching a tipping point. Tehran knew it still had room to maneuver, and Beijing ensured that room existed. So when the moment came, Iran did not accept the terms. It reset the board, closed the strait again, reasserted control, reframed the narrative, and the system held. Now the timeline compresses. The ceasefire expires in days. There is no confirmed second round of talks. Statements from both sides directly contradict each other. One declares agreement, the other denies it. And on the water, behavior reflects uncertainty. Ships rerouting, traffic slowing, risk recalculating in real time. So what happens next? The structure suggests three possible trajectories. The first, agreement under modified terms. A framework where both sides claim victory while operational control shifts subtly. Navigation continues, but under Iranian-defined parameters. Coordination replaces unilateral transit. Language masks reality. Optics diverge from substance. The second, renewed conflict. Ceasefire collapses. Operations resume. But the second phase unfolds under different conditions. Infrastructure partially restored. Capabilities recalibrated, external support continuing, costs rising, complexity increasing. The third, managed stagnation, extended ceasefire without formal resolution. Diplomatic activity continues beneath the surface, no definitive end, no clear escalation, a controlled freeze. This outcome aligns most closely with Chinese strategic preference: stability without resolution, continuity without concession. And throughout all of this, China remains publicly restrained, minimal statements, limited visibility, but consistent engagement behind the scenes. Because visibility is not the objective. Influence is. And influence is maximized when outcomes align without overt attribution. So when you look at this moment, this abrupt reversal, this collapse of certainty, you are not looking at unpredictability. You are looking at a system functioning exactly as designed, a system that allows resistance without victory, pressure without submission, movement without resolution. And the critical shift is this. This is not a bilateral dynamic. It is not America versus Iran. It is a three-player structure, and one of those players does not operate in headlines. It operates in frameworks, in timelines measured in years, not news cycles. In infrastructure, not statements. And until that reality is fully integrated into the analysis, moments like this will continue to appear sudden, unexpected, disconnected, when in fact, they are the logical outcome of a design that has been in motion for a decade.